It is more than a trial by fire. It is a rite of passage, a challenge to join the elite. If you succeed, if you can master your fear, outsmart your enemy, and never yield even to yourself, you will be changed forever. If you, the proud,
Yeah, I mean, that's American recruiting. That was actually the recruiting ad for Marine Corps officers in 1998 when I joined. And you can get a lot out of that. One, you can get the Hollywood aspects out of it, but you can also get out of this is what you get when you have an American speak on the panel. Okay. This next video is called Marine Corps Body Bearers, the Last to Let You Down. As in Paul Bearers. Okay, but no, anyway, that was the video, or that was the recruiting ad for Marine Corps officers when I went in '98. You can certainly see the Hollywood aspects of it, but also, too, pertinent to this discussion, you see who was the enemy. The enemy was a mythical dragon. Very similar if you grew up reading The Hobbit, you know, Gandalf fighting that dragon. You know, it's also about improving yourself. At one point, you see him going through this obstacle course of revolving gears. So it's also video game-esque. As well as, too, you see, it's very brief, but at one point, a lot of people jump up and they cheer. They're cheering for you. So you're improving yourself. People have got your back. They're celebrating you. You're defending them. And you're fighting some unnamed, unspeakable evil that you know exists, but maybe you just can't put your finger on it. And so when I went in '98, you know, the U.S. military was in a crisis because we had no real enemy. The Cold War was over. We had had Somalia. We had had the Balkans. And what came out of that in terms of having a recognizable enemy that you could garner passion against and hatred against and get guys to kill for and gals to kill for was uncivilized masses. So what do we do as the Marines? We help go bring order to the world. And so what I saw not so much was, particularly in my first few years in the Marine Corps, was not so much the demonization of the enemy, but rather the establishment of the Marine as a hero. Rather the establishment of the Marine as some mythological type savior, something that ties into the video games they played, the movies they grew up on, the history of the United States, ties into that ethos, ties into those myths. And it affected all of us. And it still affects us. I mean, there are movies in my life that still carry with me. Star Wars, I was taking part in a documentary last year. We were talking about these kinds of issues. And I said, I was talking about everyone's familiar with Star Wars, right? If I ruin it, I hope I don't ruin this for anyone, but at the end of Star Wars, we blow up the Death Star. And again, I just did it. That was what I was going to demonstrate, was that I said, we blew up the Death Star. Right? You were so tied into this mythology that we are the good, that we are on the side of the rebels, that we are on the side against oppression. And that is what is pumped into you, and that is what is carried into you. And not just when you get into recruit training, or in my case, or for candidate school. And I'm sorry to disappoint those of you here, yeah, I was an officer, so sorry. Disappointed a lot of folks in the room. But the dentist is on my side, that's nice, yeah. But what you had is, as Wayne spoke about, you still had that dehumanization, right? You had that breaking down of the things you're shooting at to nothing more than just simple targets, so that people aren't engaging humanely with the targets. They're engaging with what we call echo silhouettes, which didn't even have a face, just a black silhouette outline. And so we had that dehumanization, but again, really was the focus was this establishment of the Marine as a protector, okay, as a savior, as some type of heroic figure. And this, of course, is carried all throughout society. It's not like when the Marine shows up at recruit training, he is now being told this for the first time. This is something that is built in him or her throughout their lives. Veterans Day Parade. I just attended one just a few days ago, and it's no different than it was before. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, football teams, gymnasts, bands, all marching, all praising, all singing the virtues of military service, all giving thanks for the freedoms we have because of the veterans. So when you get these kids into recruit training, you really push that. You really push that you are different. You are the best of your country, and you are the ones who are going to protect the weak, defend the innocent, free the oppressed. And so what becomes out of Somalia and the Balkans then is this: we're going to go overseas and we're going to go places where there is chaos, whereas Andy and Catherine described this morning, where the savages are. And so if there was any demonization of the enemy, or if there was any enemy per se, during this period of time, particularly before 9/11, it was an enemy that was uncivilized, savage. We would have to go into Liberia and rescue our diplomats from the savage Liberians, from the savage black people, from those savage brown people. And that was how we differentiated the enemy. Of course, 9/11 occurs, and now you've got a great enemy, right? You've got this storybook, crazy enemy, okay, that you really can't pinpoint. It can be anybody you want it to be. But that causes problems, because now when we go into Iraq and Afghanistan, and you start doing things that are by no means noble, by no means honorable, where you are not the protector, where you are not the oppressor, you start to, or where you are the oppressor, okay? You're not fighting against the oppressor. You start to suffer really grave emotional and mental damage. And the fancy term for this now, of course, is moral injury. And so what happens is we build these kids up, we build these men and women up to think that they're going to be heroes, to think that they're going to go protect people, to think that they're going to defend people. And then we send them to Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever, and they take part in murder. And it's something that happened to myself, and it's happened to many, many other men and women. One of the things that Wayne mentioned in terms of the enemy and how just how simple we put the enemy, how we broad brushed it, was we used the term bad guys all the time. And we did. Whenever we were conducting our planning, wherever we suspected there might be an ambush, wherever we ran our patrols, we would use the term bad guys. Very simple, good versus evil. If I was briefing my Marines, I would use the term bad guys to talk about where we might have potential contact. Or if we're talking about contact and we got hit by those bad guys yesterday, we use those simple good versus evil. But again, eventually that all catches up. There gets to a point where you can't escape the dissonance, where your actions on the ground are not matching up to what you believed in your head. And it becomes a very real crisis. And it's why we see so many suicides, why we see so many suicides among combat veterans. If you look at the VA's, the Department of Veterans Affairs reporting on this, you'll see that among mental health problems, PTSD actually has the lowest incidence of suicide rate among veterans and veterans healthcare. These guys and gals are killing themselves, not because of PTSD, but because of guilt and shame and regret. And we've known this for decades now. In 1991, the VA did a study, found the best indicator of suicide in Vietnam veterans was combat-related guilt. And it is the case now. And we have our infantry battalions have suicide rates 14 times higher than their civilian peers. And this goes back again to this idea that they go into this thinking that they're going to be protecting, thinking that they're going to be doing good, thinking that they are going to be welcomed by the people and they're going to be protecting the people. But then when you kick a door in and you put a rifle in a lady's face and she's got her child behind her and she's crying and another little girl's crying, and you do that day in, day out, maybe your friend shoots and kills another lady, you can't sustain that. And I don't want to, I'm conscious of my time, but I will say that this is not something that is not unknown, it's not unheard of. One of my favorite authors, Paul Fussell, who was a big literary critic, fought in World War II, he describes the same phenomenon after World War II, having been told to fight and kill Germans, and then literally within weeks, by June of 1945, he was helping to rearm Germans and being told to fight the Russians. And he talks about how that, he never healed from that. He never healed from that betrayal of what he had been told, of who he was. That here we were fighting this monster enemy, this enemy that epitomized evil. But then weeks later, we were told to give rifles to them so that we could fight another new evil. And then, of course, that then becomes like, who actually am I? And it's a very dangerous as an understatement, because again, like I said, our infantry battalions coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan are experiencing suicide rates 14 times higher than their civilian peers. And much of that is tracked to guilt, shame, and regret. That can be tracked to this notion that you're going to be a hero. And so that was my experience, not so much the demonization of the enemy, which certainly occurred, don't get me wrong, but the salient thing for me was the making of the heroes that didn't exist. So, turn it over to Phil.